Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Very good morning, His Excellency Mr. Febrio Kacaribu, Chairman of Fiscal Policy Agency, Ministry of Finance of Republic of Indonesia. Good morning. The Honorable Mr. Parjono, Assistant Minister for Macroeconomic and International Finance, Ministry of Finance of Republic of Indonesia. And also our moderator, Mr. Rahmat Kaimuddin, Deputy for Infrastructure and Transportation Coordination, Coordinating Ministry for Maritime and Investment Affairs. Mr. Nur Syaifuddin, Senior Policy Analyst, Fiscal Policy Agency, Ministry of Finance of Republic of Indonesia. And also Ms. Pande Putuoka Kusmordani, Head of Center for State Revenue Policy. And also our prominent speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely, it's a pleasure to welcome all of you to the Jakarta on Seminar on Energy Transition Mechanism, ASEAN Country Updates. My name is Rima Budiarti. I'm from Ministry of Finance of Republic of Indonesia, and absolutely it's an honor for me to be your master of ceremony for today's seminar. First of all, let us extend our warmest and most sincere welcome to Jakarta, Indonesia. And since now we are in Jakarta, I would like to present one of traditional culture from Betawi called Pantun. Jalan-jalan ke Jatinegara, jangan lupa beli papaya. Selamat datang di ibu kota Jakarta, miniatur budaya Indonesia nan jaya. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start our seminar today, may I inform you about today's seminar that will divide it into 3 sessions. The first session is about Introduction and Roundtable of Energy Transition Mechanism in Indonesia. And the second session will discuss about country update on energy transition mechanism. And the last session will talk about road to just and affordable transition. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, now we will start the event with opening speech from Chairman of Fiscal Policy Agency, Ministry of Finance of Republic of Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Febrio Kacaribu.
Good morning, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Friends from non-Indonesian, those are sort of like the set of greetings that we've been doing for how many years now in Indonesia. We say greetings in many different background of languages and cultures. So that's just again reflecting how diverse Indonesia is, and also to that note, how diverse ASEAN is really. Today we are gathered here on a very important occasion here, providing us with valuable opportunities to gain updates and progress on energy transition mechanism in Indonesia, in ASEAN. I look at very familiar faces here from Indonesia side, but also friends from many countries as well from ASEAN, and most particularly also our partners have been working with us for quite some time now, building the logic and also the policy and also the projects together on the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, as an emerging market and developing economy, Indonesia takes a crucial leadership role in green transition towards low carbon economy. Last year, Indonesia submitted an enhanced NDC to the UNFCCC Secretariat with an increased emission reduction target to 31.89%. It's very detailed. Why don't we just call it 32? Sometimes I don't I don't know why, but unconditionally we promised 43.2%. Now, this enhanced NDC represents even greater ambition compared to previous Indonesia's updated NDC, which will align with our long-term low carbon and climate resilience strategy 2050 with a vision to achieve net zero emissions by 2060 or earlier. Indonesia realized that huge financing is needed to implement this climate action to support these ambitious climate target commitments. Based on our third estimate of biennial update report, this is one of the estimates, total climate financing needs to achieve the previous NDC of approximately $281 billion by 2030. It was projected to be fulfilled by public and private investment. With this increased ambition, surely the number of investment will be also increased. Indonesia continues to develop many initiatives, including, first of all, from the government side, we do our climate budget tagging. So we look at our budget, both at a national level and also at the regional level. We identify to the existing to date that we have so far, how much money has been devoted for agenda of climate action. The cumulative climate expenditure from the national government until 2021 already reaching $20 billion, which is about 8% of that annual our estimate needed for the 2030. Indonesia, ladies and gentlemen, is clearly open for transition and green business. So the government already showed our commitment. We prepared our policies. Now we're looking at the business opportunities, because after all, the government cannot solve all of this problem by ourselves. In fact, Indonesia cannot solve the global public good problem by himself. Now, transition and green investment are clearly flourishing in Indonesia. This due to, among others, the government of Indonesia has issued a number of fiscal incentives to attract private investment in green projects and green industry, including, among others, tax holidays, tax allowances, as well as facilities on VAT. There's also import duty and also property tax involved. These policies have fruitfully cultivated a climate of transitional investment and green investment in Indonesia, notably with the electric vehicle supply chain. For instance, there's an estimate by Institute for Essential Services Reform. This is estimate by ISR 2023. During the period of 2021-2022, Indonesia managed to attract investment commitments amounting to $20.3 billion in the electric vehicle supply chain. The largest share of this investment was directed towards battery production, reaching a total of $15 billion. Fiscal incentives and downstreaming policy in green industry are expected to curb carbon emission by about 15 million tons of CO2 equivalent. We also mobilize funds through innovative financing by issuing green sukuk of $6.2 billion and SDG bonds up to $577 million, both at the global and national level, which are expected to reduce about 10.6 million CO2 emissions. Ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia also has issued regulations framework to implement carbon pricing and tax. This policy will utilize carbon trading and non-trade instruments, one of which we call carbon tax, and also upcoming is carbon market that we are preparing to launch by the end of the year. This is to internalize the external cost of greenhouse gas emissions under the principle of polluters pay principle. In addition, Indonesia also plans to implement this piloting of carbon market by the end of the year, regulated and supervised by Indonesia's Financial Sector Authority, OJK. Now I'm going to move on a little bit about transition finance. With many initiatives that I have mentioned above, we realized that more efforts still needed to reach the financing need of our NDC to give actual contribution to reduce global greenhouse gas emission, while also keeping the pace of growth and our own development. In this regard, I believe that the key in achieving is our growth-friendly climate action lays on what we call transition finance. This is because transition finance involves providing financial services and products to high carbon emitting industries to support the transition towards decarbonization in the short to medium term. In G20, under G20 Indonesia presidency last year, the transition finance framework was commenced as a guidance for developing policies and financial services to support the climate-related transition. Indonesia, in this regard, launched and continued to develop our Energy Transition Mechanism country platform as an example on how we pursue the financing for transition in energy sector in Indonesia. Now I'm going to go a little bit deeper on this ETM, and I'm going to mention a little bit about JETP as well. Indonesia is proud to be among committed countries in energy transitions. Collaborating with ADB since the beginning, Government of Indonesia launched the Energy Transition Mechanism during the COP26 at Glasgow, aiming to accelerate retirement and repurposing of coal-fired power plants, and also scale up replacement clean energy technology. Indonesia established the Indonesia ETM country platform. Pak Edwin is the manager of this country platform in Indonesia with his PTSMI. And this is as a blended finance framework that will mobilize financial resources to support and also support from international partners, including multilateral and bilateral institutions, philanthropies, and also private sectors for this just and affordable energy transition. Now, our ETM country platform, through international partnership and commitments, we have secured the funding from Climate Investment Fund. This is $500 million of highly concessional fund for Indonesia. This will be leveraged up to additional $4 billion by the ADB, World Bank, and others, including the government of Indonesia. From this approved amount, the priority in the short term will be focused on accelerating early retirement of 2 projects of total retirement of 1.7 gigawatts of coal-fired power plants. The key challenge is on the involvement of the private sector, where there are still no strong engagement. In considering the risk assessment, we realize that the portion of low-cost financing from concessional flow of fund is really crucial in determining the project return. The lower concessional pricing country platform can obtain, clearly, the more flexibility the country has to develop mechanisms that could ensure acceptable credit risk and also a just transition for investors, lenders, and all related parties. So when we look at it, we're clearly talking about market mechanism. We're clearly trying to internalize all of the cost, and we will determine how much will it cost us to decarbonize. Once we get the number based on market mechanism, also with market mechanism principles, we ask who should bear the cost, how much each party would actually take parts in terms of bearing the cost. Now, I'm going to mention a little bit about Just Energy Transition Partnership, JETP. This is a commitment published by IPG countries, $10 billion from public sector and $10 billion from private financial institutions. These are commitments. With this international support, we will work together. What it means is, again, Indonesia is open for business. Indonesia is open for transition and green investment. Commitments are very much welcome. Numbers can be announced, $10 billion here, $5 billion there, another $10 billion from that side. But at the end of the day, it will boil down to transactions. it will boil down to how do you calculate the return from the investment, and how do you refine and redefine what we mean by return in this transition and green investment in Indonesia and all over the world. Our first hunch saying that it is not going to be the conventional way of defining return on investment. From the beginning, everybody knows that. From the beginning, everybody knows this is going to involve the idea, the notion of decarbonization. Who should bear the cost? Then the market mechanism will actually help us to talk about how we do the transactions. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about another regulatory framework that we've done, not only in Indonesia, but also more importantly now in ASEAN. The key challenge to transition finance is clearly the involvement of the private financing. To mobilize private investment, there is a need to establish a credible approach to identify and labeling transition activities. This is to ensure that the private sector participation would be seen not as greenwashing. In addition, to accelerate our global climate transition effort, emerging economies developing need access to fair and adequate resources in timely manner, just like we discussed before. In this regard, Indonesia, during this year, ASEAN chairmanship, we managed together with ASEAN partners, ASEAN countries, to launch our ASEAN taxonomy for sustainable finance version 2. I believe that many of you, or most of you, are already familiar with this. The ASEAN taxonomy for sustainable finance version 2 is an example on how ASEAN members are working to enable an orderly transition and foster sustainable finance implementation. This taxonomy now has introduced, among others, coal phase out as an activity that will be classified as green or amber. Depends on the qualification of the projects. The ASEAN taxonomy serves as showcase of good, credible, implementable transition with interoperable taxonomy between regions and countries. The next challenge is on how to build this interoperability of the ASEAN taxonomy with others, such as EU taxonomy. So that's why we are very grateful to have our friends from EU attending today, and will be also speaking on this matter. Also with other countries. This is also, of course, in order to boost more private sector involvement globally, not just regionally. Ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia continues to enhance international cooperation to advocate climate actions and to mobilize the private and public sector's finance for climate action. Indonesia is actively involved and continues to support and to show its leadership in leveraging sustainable financial ecosystem, including at the G20 Forum, ASEAN, and also not to mention Coalition of Ministers of Finance for Climate Action, where Indonesia is one of the co-chairs of the coalition. Indonesia also continues to enhance cooperation with stakeholders, such as Green Climate Fund has been instrumental help with Indonesia, Global Environment Facility, Adaptation Fund, international financial institutions, multilateral development banks, development partner countries, private sector, even including philanthropic institutions. We view that the need for global collaboration in order to create the ecosystem for green and transition industries, including for batteries, electric vehicles, and the green global supply chain. We all need to realize the importance and start to establish the global value chain for production, trade, and investment for green industries. Ladies and gentlemen, during Indonesia's 2023 ASEAN chairmanship, there is a resolute determination to elevate the energy transition program to the forefront of the ASEAN's priorities. The aspiration is for all ASEAN nations to collaboratively embark on a just and affordable energy transition. The ultimate goal is to seamlessly attain a low-carbon economy while simultaneously safeguarding our economic growth and preserving employment opportunities for those impacted. Let's engage in these enriching discussions today and wholeheartedly participate in this seminar. Wishing you all have a pleasant morning and fruitful discussions. And thank you very much for all of our collaborations and working together. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you for the opening speech. Please remain on the stage. Mr. Febrio Kacaribu, please remain on the stage. We would like to have photo session together. And also we would like to invite Mr. Pargiono, all moderators and panelists, Eselon II Ministry of Finance of Republic of Indonesia, to come to the stage and to have a photo sessions together. Once again, we would like to invite all moderators and panelists, Eselon II Ministry of Finance of Republic of Indonesia, to come to the stage and to join the photo session together. Once again, we would like to invite Eselon II Ministry of Finance of Republic of Indonesia to join to the stage to take a photo session together. And now we would like to have photo session together. Please, you may give your warm smile. Please, you may give your warm smile, and 1, 2, 3. All right, once again. Once again, 1, 2, 3. Well, thank you. And please, you may have a seat. Once again, thank you for the presentation together. You may have a seat. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the first session of this seminar, Introduction and Roundtable of Energy Transition Mechanism in Indonesia. This session will explain the general framework of energy transition in Indonesia, and besides that, this session will also highlight the current state of Indonesia energy transitions along with the planned financing scheme. And before we start our session, let me introduce our moderator, Mr. Rahmat Kaimuddin, Deputy for Infrastructure and Transportation Coordination, Coordinating Ministry for Maritime and Investment Affairs of Republic of Indonesia. And please welcome Mr. Rahmat Kaimuddin.
Okay, sorry. Allow me to introduce the panelists. Mr. Pargiono, Assistant Minister for Macroeconomics and International Finance, Ministry of Finance. Next panelist, Mr. Gigi Udiatmo, Director for Energy Conservation, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, or anyone representing. The next one will be Ms. Cynthia Rusli, Director of Finance from PT PLN. last but not least, Mr. Paul Butar-Butar, Deputy Head of JETP Secretariat. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. As Excellency Pak Febrio and all honored guests, I whispered to Pak Febrio just now, the best thing about the first moderator is that we don't have to repeat the context because the context has been very well explained by Pak Febrio and it's very, very fresh. So I'm just gonna jump right in with the discussion. So Indonesia, as part of the commitment for energy transition, has done multiple collaboration with international communities. And one of the strongest commitment is also in this energy transition mechanism. So, of course, energy transition is a technical problem as well as financial problem. And today with us, we have Pak Pargiono here from Ministry of Finance, who will help coordinate also the financing at some point on this one. So Pak Pargiono, we know that this ETM process has been ongoing for a while. I think it's been discussed in COP26 last time, and there's a lot of work that has been done by Indonesia, government of Indonesia, especially Ministry of Finance, both in issuing the regulation for fiscal support on accelerating energy transition, and also preparing for the pilot project together with MEMR. So, would you like to explain to us how far the regulation has been implemented, and what is the progress on the ETM pilot project, especially on the PLTO Cirebon? Please, Pak.
Terima kasih, thank you very much Pak Rahmat. Good morning, selamat pagi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. As already mentioned by Pak Rahmat, no need to repeat what I actually think that we have in the Ministry of Finance, because everything is done by Pak Febrio, then my job is actually done actually. Just, if I don't know whether some slide will be shown, but directly to the point that Pak Rahmat explains, some progress that we have in the Ministry of Finance. The first is on the CIF, SCT investment plans. Yeah. It's about 500 million in CIF-X funding together with 2.0 billion in MDV's co-financing, and nearly 1.3 in other co-financing. The investment plan aims to achieve the three main pillars: governance, peoples, and infrastructures. And this is already running so far, Pak Rahmat. And then when you pointed directly to the two projects, PT SME, Pak Edwin is here, and Indonesia Investment Authority are in the process of due diligence on the two energy transition mechanism projects. The first project is being conducted by INA with PT Cirebon Electric Power, which is about 660 megawatts, with the total investment of $877 million. The second project is being also conducted by PT SME with the PLTU Pelabuhan Ratu, which is about 1,050 megawatts with an asset value of 12 trillion in local currency rupiah. And then currently on this mechanism, Ministry of Finance is also developing a regulation on ETM country platforms that Pak Febrio mentioned. That if you have slide, I think better to mention to open in the slide 12. This is what I mentioned. Okay. On the ATM country platforms, it regulates the governance of energy transition mechanism and also flowing of the financing process for the ATM, which include governments, investment, and also concessional loans, guarantee and PPP that Pak Febrio mentioned, from the de-risking, also the side from the government that can provide, including the incentive from the tax, including also the guarantee and de-risking. And then also we have what we call it Indonesia Investment Guarantee (PTPII), which also doing the on the way. And then on the process, if I just go moderately on the energy transition mechanism country platform structure, let me start with the, if you have already ideas on the source of funding, on the purpose of projects, then we can help on the blended financing. Then you have to come directly to country platform that we have here. Pak PT SME, Pak Edwin is in charge. Under PT SME as the country platforms, we are in the governments and coordinating ministers among us, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Energy, and Ministry of State-owned Enterprises and other ministries related, will be on the steering board who will in charge of assessing any proposals, any ideas of projects that we have from the PTSME proposed. Then we assessing for any government's support, whether this is the risking, commercial loans, technical assistance, or other subsidy, which later on the pricing. And then we also be working on the PTPII on the equity, low-cost refinancing, performance-based payments. And then PT SME will be assessing on that way. And further, we will come up with the Clean Energy Fund or CEF, and then also the carbon reductions funds. I don't know whether you can open on the slide 12. The outcome on the energy transitions projects, certainly with the PLN in charge, is IPP project, is also on the pipelines projects. Then we can measure as well as on the carbons credits. And then the fourth one, Pak Rahmat, on the just transition is among the core also component, the fourth one of ETM, to provide a just transition strategy in Indonesia ATM. The strategic environment and social assessment is now being developed. The SESIA National Workshop has been also held last week in August, and the report is expected to be launched in this next month on October. I think this is for update that I could provide, Pak Rahmat. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Parjono. So basically, regulation is there, projects is there, and then platform is there. PTSMI, if you don't know, the leader of PTSMI is Pak Edwin here, the handsome gentleman in batik. So all the international bankers who want to provide blended finance can go contact Pak Edwin here. And of course, we need to make sure that there is a just mechanism as well that has been worked on. So yeah, I think we are ready to conduct this. So maybe the next, I would like to ask Bu Cynthia here as a representative of PLN. So what is the PLN plan on to support this energy transition mechanism? Please, Bu Cynthia.
Thank you, Pak Rahmat. So good morning, everyone. So we have been hearing the effort from the government. Once it's the regulatory framework and also the intention for the government to achieve the net NDC by 2030 with the enhanced NDC, and also the support from the global community in terms of the JETP platform as well as the local platform on the ETM country platform. I think from PLN as an operator, of course, we need to also develop our own scenario, which is workable with the global and the local platform. And in order to achieve the enhanced NDC and at least for PLN also to be able to deliver our net zero roadmap by 2060, so decarbonization plan. For PLN itself, we have actually translated the enhanced NDC for 31.9% by 2030 into what basically needs to be done within PLN and specifically in the electricity sector. So PLN needs to reduce by 2030 of 127 million tons of CO2 emissions. And that means by 2030 it has to be at the level of 370 million tons of CO2. And then we have developed various effort basically within PLN. So since planning, so last 2 years in 2021, PLN together with the MAMR have already started to develop our greenest RUPTL, meaning that we have already shutting down the plan to develop more coal fire power plants. And we have also do a certain initiatives, efforts in co-firing, some other effort within the operational level to ensure that we are able to reduce our CO2 emissions. So by that, from the planning stage and up to the operational level at this moment, we have already been, in the planning stage, reducing the emission by 3.7 billion CO2 emissions. And after that, then along with the government policy and initiatives with the JETP and the plan towards the NDC, enhanced NDC by 2030, we also involve as an operator with the government in the technical working groups, specifically developing a scenario. So I think JETP has already JETP Secretariat has already delivered their scenario assessment. I think yesterday Pak Rahmat has already led the meeting for that for public consultation with stakeholders. And with that, PN also basically look into what matters in terms of system, electricity security, sustainability, financial sustainability, fiscal sustainability, and of course environmental sustainability. So PLN as an operator, as a utility, also has considerations in developing our own scenario and has already delivered our feedback to the JETP Secretariat of the, what we call it, the CIP, the CIPP, or the scenario developed by the JETP Secretariat. So I think the next phase after we have done our planning stage and the scenario assessment, then we need to look into what basically scenario that is executable, workable from PLN perspective in terms of the energy security, fiscal sustainability, financial sustainability, corporate financial sustainability, and environmental sustainability. And we have assessed 4 scenarios. And basically, in conclusion, we have achieved to the conclusions that we are choosing the optimum scenario is the accelerated renewable energy with coal phase down. What does it mean? It's basically we have 75% additional renewable energy and 25% with the gas as a transition for enabling us to do this decarbonization roadmap. And the other issue that is also very important here is the number 4, that with that scenario, basically PLN power system emissions for the CO2 is basically below 370. So by 2030, if we are able to execute that plan, so basically it's already beyond the enhanced, already below the enhanced NDC. So that's also quite a good point in terms of planning, scenario planning. And what we see with the scenario of accelerated renewable energy is that we are operating within the covenants, within that covenants, debt service coverage ratio, debt to EBITDA, and also debt capacity. And we see that the fiscal exposure to that scenario is also something quite moderate, that we think that the fiscal capacity is also being able to absorb that. So basically that's the situation at this moment, Pak Rahmat. In short, I think PLN has already put an effort to find the right scenario that we think meet those four aspects of energy security, sustainability, corporate financial sustainability, environmental sustainability, as well as the fiscal sustainability. So we have quite a lot of sets of slides for everyone. Then, if you want to deep dive on that various specific aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Cynthia. So PLN has done a lot of work, have a lot of menu, if you will, yeah, depending what is the support needed, as Pak Febrio mentioned. Once we do, there will be some impacts, and also who can support us pay for the bill, if you will. Okay, after this, apparently we have one online guest, online panelist from the MEMR. I would like to introduce you to Pak Katro Romandi from MEMR. And maybe also, Pak Katro, are you online?
Yeah, Pak Deputy.
Thank you, Pak Katro. So we have a lot of guests here, and I think we want to discuss on the energy transition, and especially on the energy transition mechanism, which practically require coal-fired power plant early retirement roadmap. So we understand that MEMR is currently drafting a ministerial decree on the CFPP early retirement roadmap, and also the project assignment, as in accordance with the Presidential Decree number 112 in 2022. So can you give us update on what is the progress on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Deputy. Yang kami hormati Pak Febrio, Chair of Fiscal Policy Agency, Minister of Finance, Pak Jono, Assistant Minister for Macroeconomic and International Finance, and Ibu Sunja Rusdi, Pak Paul Buta, and especially Pak Moderator, Pak Deputy Kemenkeu. Sebelumnya Pak Yudo and Pak Diki could not attend directly, Pak, because we all are now at Bali for ASEAN Energy Business Forum, and also me myself also now attending for this energy business forum. Related to what has been asked by Pak Moderator, Pak Deputy, we do have some slides probably that the organizer can show the latest slide number 4 probably. So with the coordination among stakeholders, with Minister of State-Owned, Ministry of Finance, and PLN, UNOPS, ISR, and also ITB, we continue to intensify the so-called pilot early retirement transaction to grow energy transition market mechanism viability. And again, we identify some research to achieve the target for the coal-fired power plant early retirement, and there are 15 units probably at the moment under the roadmap, under the draft of the roadmap has been identified, but still we haven't yet get the exact number, what will be the best options or what will be the best mechanism that we would like to have for the early retirement of coal-fired power plant. And therefore, we expect that based again with closely working with the JETP, Just Energy Transition Partnership Secretariat, that already also in the progress of finalizing the comprehensive investment plan and policy, JETP could be aligned with our roadmap from the MEMR based to what are the requirement of the JETP. So on the roadmap, actually, we identify based on the capacity of the coal-fired power plant belongs to PLN, belongs to ITP, and belongs to captive. But at the moment, can you show the slide number 4? Yeah, there's one update for the JFTP early retirement of captive power plant. So, next. Slide number 4. Yeah, yeah, thank you. So we identify the capacity belongs to PLN, IDP, and captive, but still at the moment we only have the data based on PLN data of the coal-fired power plant. And we also considered about the lifetime and capacity factor. How can any the gas productions if we terminate or if we close down or phasing down the coal-fired power plant, and what would be the economic value if we retire this more accelerated, and based on the input coming from the Minister of Finance, especially, and also Minister of Finance and also Minister of State, on that if we try to retire, we have to consider about the PP of tenaga listrik, Pak. So we have to consider about the subsidy and the compensation, and also we have to consider about the just transition of the aspect rate of if we retire for this 15 unit of identified coal-fired power plant. So we still have, at the moment, Pak, we're still drafting, and we will have two ministerial decree. The first decree related on the roadmap itself, and the first ministerial decree will be on the list of the coal-fired power plant, which is also being agreed. If the list is being agreed by the Minister of Finance and also Minister of State. I will stop here, Pak. Thank you.
Thank you for the update. And I think on the energy transition, we have here the Deputy Head of JETP Secretariat, Pak Paul. And you know, there is a lot of discussion just now mentioning about JETP, Pak Paul. Can you update us, what is the process of financing on the energy transition in Indonesia, and what are the targets set by JETP? Give us update on the JETP.
Thank you, Pak Moderator, Pak Deputy. Good morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Pak Kaban, Pak Febrio, dan Bapak Ibu panelis dan juga Bapak Ibu yang hadir di tempat ini. As everybody knows, the JETP has been announced in November, and Secretariat has been working since February this year under the guidance of three ministries actually, led by Pak Rahmat from Menko Marves, then led also by Pak Febrio from Finance Minister, and also Pak Dadan from Myanmar. JETP Secretariat has been working together with a lot of partners with working group. Some of them actually are here. We have World Bank here. We have UNDP. I see here colleague and other parties, including the civil society from Indonesia, working together to prepare a kind of a credible scenario pathway for the just energy transition for Indonesia. And then as a result, or the initial target of the JETP as announced during the G20 last year, it was said we need to meet 290 million ton of CO2 from power sectors and 34% of our renewable energy. And after the evaluation by technical teams led by IEA, we found out that it would be doable, but it would require a substantial amount of money, substantial effort from everybody, then make it almost impossible to implement. That's why the working group has been the technical working group has been working together to and getting the data from Myanmar, from PLN, and from captive powered, and trying to see what would be the credible scenario for Indonesia energy transition. As promised, we have finalized from the Secretariat, have finalized the comprehensive investment policy plan, and then has been submitted to government and also IPG, and now is under discussion by government as well as IPG, and we expect to receive feedback so that we can later on respond to that feedback. If you can go to the last slide, please. So on the scenario that we have, as you may know that we have actually 5 investment plan. So five investment area. The first investment area will be in transmission and grid. The second one will be in coal phase out. And the third one will be investment in dispatchable renewable energy, and fourth investment area will be on variable, and the last one will be on the supply chains for the renewable energy technology. Based on the scenario that we have prepared together with the working group, we see actually the target could be reached to 395 million ton of CO2 in the power sector, but it also will still need a lot of effort. There are preconditions that need to be met. For example, we need to invest in a lot of geothermal, a lot of renewable, a lot of hydro, in particular also a lot of variable renewable, more than 20 gigawatt of solar PV and so on. And then this will require collaboration from everyone in order to make it happen. There are still a lot of issues there that need to be looked at in detail in order to make it happen. And in particular, actually, this issue, the financing, we could only do that if we can get financing. For example, in the scenario that we have now for the JETP, it said that we would need to phase out about 6 point something gigawatt of coal power plant in order to make room for renewable. And also we have to phase down by reducing the capacity factor in order to make more room for renewable. And all of that will need financing. So as already mentioned by Pak Febrio, by Pak Rahmat, by Pak Barjonen, as well as by Bu Cynthia, all of this will need money. So Bu Cynthia has already mentioned about projects that they will include in the PLN ultra accelerated and accelerated scenario, and only if sufficient financing would be available, then we could really make it happen. If not, then we need to, maybe we have to go with our own scenario that we would not meet the target of 2030, but we could move for example, with other target years that need to recalculate later on. But important is, as mentioned by Pak Febri before, there is a commitment for 20 billion to be mobilized by IPG member and GFANS, and we have checked what would be the, let's say, where the 20 billion could be invested. So if we want to move forward, for example, we need really a lot of investment in transmission, connecting Sumatra and Java, for example, or connecting, let's say, areas in Sulawesi, so that the renewable energy can be evacuated to meet the demand of the captive. We might want to think even to utilize the renewable energy potential in Papua, so that we could, let's say, evacuate that to the smelters in Halmahera or in Obi Island, in order to reduce the need for coal captive in that area for smelters and so on. And these need investment. And also, for as can be seen in the slide here, we expect that the public money, the 20 billion consists of 10 billion of public money and 10 billion from commercial. We expect that most of the financing from the public sector could be used to finance grid or transmission and also early retirement, because we expect that this funding or because this investment would not have sufficient return. That's why it would not fit for commercial. But the other, for example, the variable renewable or some of the dispatchable renewable could go for commercial financing and so on. And I think I will stop here, Pak. Makasih.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Paul. I think you see there's projects already identified in JETP, and also there's a lot of work on the roadmap, if you will. So thank you, Pak. So maybe I just want to pick up a little bit on your comments on the financing package, because people typically say that there's a lot of money in the world, right? Whether it's suitable to support the financing or not, and specifically on the ETM and especially also in the infrastructure, do you see that there is enough money available that and also suitable in terms of tenure, in terms of concessionality to support the projects?
Unfortunately, out of the I would only talk about the public money, but out of the 10 billion money that has been promised, only few of them is really allocated for let's say transmission or early retirement. So to date, as of now, the only funding that is available for early retirement is actually the one for ETM. So not much, let's say if Pak Katro, for example, mentioned about 4.8 gigawatt to be retired, then other than the ETM money, we don't have any money left actually. Also, we call it just transition. So we expect actually that the financing of just part of the energy transition, we expect that should be a grant. But so far, we only see that less than 300 million would be used as a grant, will get as a grant. And about half of them has been allocated for technical assistance. So all in all, we see that the financing available for moving forward with this just energy transition would not be sufficient. It requires a lot more concessional funding in order to be able to move forward with the scenario. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Paul. So a lot of good work being done, but of course a lot of homework moving forward as well. Okay. I'm conscious on my original schedule, 10:15, we have to finish. So maybe before I close, I would like to ask our panelists here, each one to, because we have all these prominent members, maybe if there is something that you want to tell them, Pak Pargiono, to the audience, please. Any messages?
Thank you. Just to highlight, Pak Febrio mentioned the cost is very expensive and the government is not able to bear all the costs. And certainly the private sector involvement, engagement to this process investment is needed. And I see here most of us, the private sector actually have a high interest to this investment. And we are really guided by yours in terms of how we can create the corridor, the framework and regulatory framework that the private sector can be, friendly, come to this process, to this energy transition mechanism. And I see also in the global move from the G20, for example, the intention to reform the MDBs, for example, that to expand the mission is not only to the prosperity and also to poverty, but also to global public goods. But then we questioning on the financing that really no one can answer up to now, even though already hire expert groups. But we can put the number, but we haven't been able to put the way to go with this number in a more concrete way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bu Cynthia.
Yeah, I think I can say that Indonesia has, we have already started exercising the scenario, and at least we have the initial numbers of the projects already, whether it's the investment focus area in the generations or transmission distribution, including the smart grid, and the level of 150 billion US dollars is something that is now on the table, and hundreds of projects. I think yesterday around 950 projects lists are there, and for the priority projects is around 450 projects. So for lenders and for anyone, the partners in financing can also start looking into the projects, because sooner or later we need to develop the renewable energy, base load, variable renewable energy, or green enabling infrastructure, the transmission and smart grid. So there are a very vast areas of investment that can be supported by everyone. So we are ready for that, and please start discussing with us, because numbers will, of course, will be dynamics, but the needs for the investments are there. And of course for PLN, again, so long as the assistance and the help extended by the global communities to PLN as a corporate needs to be sound, needs to be competitive. And of course, we also expect some sort of accelerated in terms of the process of the extended financing facility to PLN, so that we start working on one by one of the projects. For the early terminations, I think we are now working on it on the private sector side in terms of PPA. Of course, consents from PLN needs to be there. We just need to look into how it would fit into the system and how the clause in the PPA enable us to do so. I think this should not be an issue. So we are working on it. On PLN own, it has to be also discussed a bit on the execution in terms of the support from the government, in terms of the stability of the system, etc. So more on the technical. So I think all in all, in the investment plan are there. On the early retirements, we are also working on it. We are quite optimistic that Indonesia is serious and PLN is also serious in this endeavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If Pak Katro still with us, Pak Katro, any message for the audience?
Thank you, Pak Moderator. If I may, Pak, the key challenge, and also mentioned by Pak Fabio earlier on the opening, is the involvement of the stakeholders, Pak. So how is the flexibility mechanism to ensure the energy transition mechanism exist in the country? So investment is surely needed, and it needs a strong collaboration and among international partners, Pak, government, stakeholders, and its value chain. And I would like also to deliver the high appreciation, Pak, for the Minister of Finance, Pak, for convening this valuable meeting. And we all actually looking for the output and outcome for sustainable finance, Pak, existence. So global participation and collaboration is necessary, Pak, to achieve carbon neutrality in power sector. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Katro. And Pak Paul.
One thing that I take note from what we have done so far as part of in the preparation of the CIPP document is actually the collaboration. So it's really nice to see that under the guidance of the government, Pak Rahmat, Pak Febrio, and Pak Dadan, and also collaborating with all of the stakeholders, PLN and DJK, Pak Katro teams and so on, and also including, of course, the international organization that have supported us in preparing all of the document. This nice collaboration has been able to put up a plan. It is not perfect. It is not perfect, but at least we have a plan that we can, let's say, good as a basis for us to discuss. That will help us in meeting our target, our JETP target, and also meeting our net zero emissions. And then next for us at the Secretariat will be waiting for the guidance from the government and also IPG, so that after that we can get the documents for public comments, so that all the efforts that we have spent, that everybody have spent for this document could be materialized later on. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Paul. So to summarize, basically it seems like there's a lot of commitment and a lot of good work has been done by the Indonesian government and with PLN, also together with JETP Secretariat and the working groups, that is basically collaboration with a lot of international organizations as well. Policies are being created, platforms being created. But of course, it seems to me it's a very, very complex challenge. Indonesia is very complex. It's a growing country, still middle income. And of course, with the geography, is also facing very unique problems. So bear with us, but we of course need to be keep in high spirit, because this is very, very important for all of us. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to moderate the session, Pak Febrio and everyone. And let me give back to the MC. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rahmat Kaimuddin, and also all speakers, panelists for the insightful discussions for the first session on this seminar today. And ladies and gentlemen, before we go to the second sessions, I would like to inform you that we have already provided some meals and beverage outside the ballroom, so you may have enjoy the meals and beverage while we continue our session. Again, thank you for the panelists, and we would like to continue to our second sessions. Country update on energy transition mechanism. Ladies and gentlemen, and these second sessions will explain the study of CFPP to be retired earlier in Indonesia and update other countries' progress. And absolutely, this session will be guided by our honorable moderator, Mr. Nur Syaifuddin, Senior Policy Analyst, Fiscal Policy Agency, Ministry of Finance of Republic of Indonesia. And all ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mr. Nur Syaifuddin.
Thank you for Master Ceremony for inviting me to moderate the second session, and I'll take the lecturers as a moderator for the second moderator, just like Pak Rahmat already take the first moderator lecturers. For the second moderator, I will take it much easier because the context already delivered by Pak Febrio, and all the strategic policies and etc. already been discussed clearly on the first session. So then in the second session, just like the Master of Ceremony already delivered, that we will talk and discuss about the study on the CFPP early retirement, particularly in Indonesia and Philippines. And without further ado, I will invite our first speaker, Pak Edwin Syahruzad, as the CEO of PT Sarana Multi Infrastructure in Indonesia. Welcome, Pak. from virtual, we will have Pak David Elzinga from ASEAN Development Bank. Please welcome, Pak. And we will also have our third panelist, Mr. Michael Osinakros. Welcome, Pak Michael. So, I'm very delighted this morning because in this seminar on the second session on the study of the CFPP early retirement, we have three prominent speakers that they are very keen in the process of the CFPP early retirement, particularly Pak Edwin as the CEO of PTSMI of Indonesia, that been done with a couple of initiatives related with the energy transition mechanism in Indonesia from the as the country platform manager, and we also have Pak David, who have been done with study in the Cirebon coal-fired power plant, and we also have Pak Michael that been studying on the and preparing the policy on the energy transition mechanism in the Philippines, and we'll be hearing further, from our three prominent speakers about each of the particular topics. And for Pak Edwin, I think you already prepared with some presentation, Pak, about how the advanced updates on the process of the early retirement in the Pelabuhan Ratu coal-fired power plant, Pak, and perhaps you can also share any challenges as well as the next steps that been preparing by PTSMI. Please, without further ado, Pak. Thank you, Pak.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be part of the panelists in the very important session. I think as a country platform, I think we are involved in the two showcases. First, I think is also we are involved in the showcase, which is coal phasing out of Pelabuhan Ratu project, whereas we have formed a consortium with PTBA. It is, like Bu Cynthia mentioned before, it is the asset spin-off modality, whereby on the other IPP modality, we are also supporting, and we work hand in hand with INA to support the coal phase out of Cirebon project. I think with regard to the Pelabuhan Ratu project, as I mentioned before, this is the power plant that is quite critical because it is the source of base load modality for PLN, and it is located in Java, and the size is quite big, as the capacity is 3 times 330 megawatt, and also commercial operation has been commenced in 2014, and I think the estimated book value is quite big, is an approximate number of 12 trillion rupiah. And I think this is the first constraint. There is no way we can have a transaction below estimated book value because it will bring PLN to the risk of state losses. And I think from technical standpoint, it is main source of electricity production to Java, since it produces an approximate number of 5,500 gigawatt hour per year in 2021. I think we structure the transaction in such way there is an equity portion where we collaboratively with PTBA and PLN would be the shareholders. So PLN will receive money from that part. The indicative equity is approximately 30%, representing the project cost, or 4.13 trillion rupiah, and also we hope that we can get collaborative financing to the project in a number of close to 10 trillion, which is primarily, I think that we can have a concessional support from the government. Of course, we need also to collaboratively close a financing mechanism whereby it represents a blended finance from many as possible commercial financier or commercial lenders that would be attracted to these projects. Next, I think, of course, the modalities start with the spinning off of this asset, because this is the asset already in the balance sheet of PLN, so there might be some sale of asset to SPV initially owned by PLN, and in the second stage or in the later stage, we are going to conduct a sale and purchase agreement to acquire some shares of SPV, 100% owned by PLN. And of course, there is an element of early retirement or phase out period, which according to the model, we have appointed consultant KPMG in this particular case, and they have built a building block, not really a financial model that is based on reality, but a building block based on assumption here and there. And we expect to get 8 years curtailing the lifetime of the initial production, or lifetime of the assets, so that we can have some quite, this is IRR that is reflecting more towards, I think, impact investor rather than a commercial investors. And I think next, with regard to the process, currently we are, as I mentioned before, we have formed a consortium between the three of us, and we are working on it. We are in the stage of due diligence at the moment. The consultant has been appointed, but there is also critical issues. I think we have pointed out several critical issues that needs to be following up, because it is not under our control, but it is under perhaps there is some element of critical issues under PLN control, and PLN need a revision with regard to the PP or regulation that stipulates the direct appointment to the SPV from the asset previously owned by PLN, because it is the SPV that is going to have a contractual agreement with regard to the PPA and the terms and condition of electricity production, and terms and condition with regard to the technicalities, and of course the return, because return is very important, and also return to the investors as well as the financing support to the project. Next slide, perhaps. This is some of critical issues that needs to be resolved quite soon. I think some of it, is with regard to the direct assignment, direct appointment, and the other perhaps also with regard to the, I think even though in the previous session that it's been mentioned about the mechanic of the country platform, but we still need also the PMK, Ministry of Finance regulation to stipulate to enable us to perform a role as a country platform, and what is really the mechanism, the protocol that needs to be conducted in such way we can also propose for this particular case, we can propose the request for a government support. I think I stop here and I come back to moderator, please.
Thank you, Pak Edwin, for very comprehensive explanation on the current situation or current situation on the providing or process to the early retirement for the Pelabuhan Ratu. I will have a couple of further following up discussion, Pak. But first, I will invite our second speaker first, Pak. Ya, Pak David Elzinga. Are you there, Pak? So Pak David is the ADB's senior analyst for climate change energy specialist, yeah, and it's been done from his experience, yeah, for more than 20 years experience in dealing and conducting a couple of studies on the climate and energies with different institutions and organizations. So, Pak David, perhaps you can explain further about the current result of your study regarding the Cirebon coal-fired power plant, Pak. As yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, that according to the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, there are 2 coal-fired power plants that are expected to be early retired in the table, Pak. So please, Pak. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, and I very much appreciate the invitation to this event, and I'm sorry that I can't be there in person, but very happy to participate virtually in this very important event. If I could ask that the organizers put up the presentation and maybe starting with slide number 3. And just while they organize the presentation, I'll just highlight that we have heard from many speakers on the complexity of the energy transition, and there are many moving parts as the country develops their energy system and their power system. Yes, that was the correct slide. Please display that. As the country grows and develops their energy system in a way that is needing to support the economy and the society in general with energy to develop from a socio-economic aspect. If you could display the presentation, please, with slide 3. So before I talk specifically about Cirebon, I just wanted to highlight the broad range of activities and just try to put them in context in Indonesia. So, of course, we've heard a number of people speak about the JETP, the Just Energy Transition Partnership, and I'll just highlight here that we see a number of different initiatives numbered 1 through 5 at the top of the slide. Number 2 is one element, which is the early coal-fired power plant retirement. But we have, thank you. We see that numbers 1, 3, 4, and 5 have a range of development of different areas in the power sector, as well as developing the value chain for energy technologies in Indonesia that can provide additional economic value. And I think it's really important to look at this holistically to see the need for transmission and distribution, baseload RE as well as variable RE to really meet that cost as well as energy security aspects for the development of the power sector. So really, the just energy transition is about not only decreasing emissions, but providing more power to meet those socioeconomic needs. And when we look at going down to the bottom of the slide, the work on energy transition by ADB has a number of activities that can support this energy transition in Indonesia. So we're looking at a results-based lending opportunity with PLN. This can support a number of both deployment of renewables as well as supporting the accelerated retirement of coal-fired power plants. We're looking at a financial intermediary loan with PTSMI that could support Palabuhan Ratu project. Of course, the Cirebon transaction, which I'll speak in more detail in a minute. A prime step project which involves education around clean energy system development. Those are four projects that are found under the Climate Investment Fund's Accelerating Coal Transition window that we have partnered with the World Bank to support Indonesia in their application for this amount of 500 million in concessional funding. So this fits underneath this particular work fits underneath and can be seen as JETP initiatives under specific projects that support that broader strategy that is being developed under the JETP. In addition to that, we are working on a standalone financing on a policy-based loan, which would provide fiscal support to Indonesia that will support some of those policy developments that are happening, and some of those were mentioned by ASDM earlier in terms of the coal accelerated coal retirement roadmap. And then lastly, a range of different technical assistance, including our feasibility study that can really support the analytical work on a range of different areas in the energy sector development, as well as carbon finance, environmental and social aspects, and as well, lastly, I'll simply highlight the ASEAN transition taxonomy, in addition to other areas that are really important for this broader energy transition work in Indonesia. Next slide, please. I'll highlight that in the context of ASEAN, we are also doing work on these topics more broadly in Southeast Asia, but also other countries are starting to investigate and look at how can they develop plans and strategies and specific projects that can support the energy transition in their own country. And just highlighting a number of aspects and how we're supporting this, we're working on a ETM funding vehicle that could support transactions in a range of countries in the region and the Southeast Asia region and beyond. We've been able to bring some concessional funding into a trust fund within ADB that allows us to support these activities. We're working on using Indonesia as a model for some initial carbon methodology and also supporting the ASEAN taxonomy work. So really looking at some structural market-based approaches that can support energy transition. And then the last two topics specifically on just transition, as well as safeguards, and the safeguards including both environmental and social aspects. So that links to the just transition side. So very much making sure that the environment as well as the people and communities are supported in going forward with the energy transition. If I can get you to go to the next slide and then forward one more. Where I would like to, yes, next slide, perfect. Thank you. Just now talk specifically about the Cirebon transaction. And this is a rather complex slide. And I want to highlight just a couple points. For one, both INA as well as ADB at this point are looking at providing funding to support this Cirebon transaction. ADB would be providing funds on a debt basis, and INA, with the support of PTSMI, as mentioned earlier, would be providing equity funds. What this allows us to do in the transaction is use both debt to relever the project, and by relevering the project, shifting some of those expected equity returns by the owners of the plant into low-cost debt, we can actually use that approach to shorten the life of the project. And then the equity portion provides a different role. What it allows is those who want to exit the transaction can do so. But I think it's very important to note that INA, together with PTSMI, are not investing in equity in a coal plant alone. They're investing in a coal plant that is doing an accelerated retirement. I think that's a very important element to highlight, that these transactions working together with both debt and equity can very much provide significant value to all stakeholders, those who want to continue in the coal plant operation while it accelerates its retirement, and those who want to exit. This really provides a complete package for this type of transaction. I also want to just highlight that, of course, PLN is a key stakeholder in this, and one of the challenges with this project in that PLN has a supplier of power through Chiribon that is contracted to 2042. In this context, with the ETM transaction, now this plant will cease to produce electricity much earlier than planned. So PLN is a very essential stakeholder in this discussion, because now they have to understand, okay, where is that power going to come from in 2037 up to 2042? We knew the source of the power and we knew the price of the power during that period. What is the replacement power going to be? And no matter how much analysis we do over to determine this, we're not exactly going to have full certainty in the future. The power may be less expensive in the future than this coal plant would provide. That would be an upside for PLN and those buying power from PLN. But the power could be also more expensive. Therefore, who's going to pay for that? And that question has come up earlier as well. So we're dealing with some level of uncertainty as to the future impacts of this transaction. And we have to work to manage that through these broader energy transition activities that I highlighted earlier. If we can go to the next slide, and this will be my last slide. Just to provide you quite a specific update on this transaction, we're still working on this with the range of stakeholders. One of the key aspects that we're working on is the launch of the environmental and social audit and an initial just transition assessment. So this is very much working to determine how we can manage any of the environmental and social impacts of ETM. Overall, this can be a very positive transaction, but if there are impacts, how do we mitigate them? And we're currently studying this to determine how to do that. We're currently working with the commercial partners on this to understand the ETM versus business as usual costs, and therefore that will allow us to structure the financial aspect. We're launching the PLN grid study to address that issue on what is the impacts of the early retirement on system planning. And this is, as I said, introduces some uncertainty, because the timing of the retirement is beyond the RUPTL planning period, and we also can't know for certain what the future looks like with respect to technology costs and technology capabilities. So this is a challenge to really make a plan today that is going to have a long-term impact on the future. And then also a range of interministerial discussions to make sure that there is an enabling environment, especially for PLN to pursue such a transaction. And that is one of the key aspects that we're working on at this stage. So with that, I want to conclude and happy to answer any questions and looking forward to participate in the discussion following the other presenter. Thank you. Back to you, Pa.
Thank you very much, Pak David, for your very comprehensive explanation on starting from the bigger picture of the ETM and other just transition mechanism that's been doing in the particularly for Indonesia, and you also explain about the current status of your study and perhaps next steps to achieve some objective of the energy transition mechanism, particularly for Cirebon coal-fired power plant. And yes, Pak, for sure we will invite any questions or perhaps highlights from participants. But first, I'd like to invite Pak Michael from the Philippines. That he is the one that preparing the among others, the energy planning and policies in the Philippines. And I'd like to invite Michael Sinacros from the Philippines to share his thought in this regard, Pak. Thank you, Pak. Please.
Okay, thank you and good morning to everyone. And I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting me here to be part of this event, although I'm joining online because I'm here in Bali attending the ASEAN ministers meeting. Let me just share my presentation.
Yeah, we have to wait a minute, Pak, for the presentation, Pak. Or maybe you can go on with your explanation, Pak, maybe.
Sorry for why.
Okay, Pak Michael, maybe you can unmute, Pak. We cannot hear you, Pak. Please, Pak.
Okay, can you see my presentation? Huh?
Okay, so Tim, please. No.
Not yet.
Not yet, yeah, Pak. Well, maybe you can. Yeah, Okay. Can you share? You can start share, Pak.
Can you now see my presentation?
Not yet, Pak.
Okay. I don't know how to.
Or maybe you can restart your Teams, Pak, and then you can share the screen then.
Now see my presentation? No, not yet.
Yes, not yet,
Not
Pak.
yet?
Not yet, Pak.
It's not working on the phone.
Oh yeah. Oh, otherwise, you need to like restart your computer or something, Pak. Masih enggak jelas posisinya, ya? Okay. Okay. So once Pak Michael still preparing his computer, I'd like to maybe highlight some point from either Pak Edwin and Pak David from their previous presentation that from Pak Edwin, at least you need a more mandate, Pak, ya, with regard to the Minister of Finance decree, as providing some fiscal incentives to your portion as the ETM country platform, Pak. And so far, we know that this PMK, this minister decree is ongoing, and we may expect that it can be enacted by Bu Menteri maybe in the near future, Pak. So then, if I may note that according to your calculation, Pak, the IR, potential IR will be 8.5%, and there is no increase in terms of tariff, Pak. So would it be preferable, Pak, for the investor with your finding, Pak, and maybe with your country platform manager position right now, is there any like fiscal incentive or fiscal facilitation that can be you need to be done to support your position, Pak? And for Pak David, we know that in here we also have our colleagues from World Bank. They also doing some just transition study, Pak, and with like very much happier, yeah, if our colleagues from World Bank also can join with us in the discussion. So far, Pak, if we may refer to your current study, Pak, in terms of because the just transition will be conducted in the asset level. So so far, any findings that from the community surrounding the Cirebon that been aware about the potential impact of the Cirebon one early retirement in the near future, Pak. Then I think that from me as the follow-up question both for Pak Edwin and Pak David, while we are waiting for Pak Michael to be prepared, Pak. Please, Pak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. I think we are in the journey to develop transition asset class. Yeah. And it is a complex asset class to me, and one of the narrative is coal phase out because of Indonesia's situation right now. And from my understanding about the coal phase out itself, and our fact finding to the constraint that limits us as new investors, new impact investors, to this journey. I think it requires lower cost of capital, whether it is equity and financing, and how can we fairly sharing the burden, as Pak Febrio mentioned and Pak Rahmat also mentioned in previous section. I think for us, first of all, as a SMV, Special Mission Vehicle of the Ministry of Finance, we are frequently assigned by MOF to act on behalf of MOF in conducting transaction that is having a big impact but not commercially viable. So I think that's why government support is part of the blended element that enable us to perform, and to collect and collaborate, and at the end of the day, provide the project with lower cost of capital, which is in a particular case, lower cost of debt. I think for that reason, I think we can start exploring and replicate, for another transition asset class. And of course, we also expect that the support not only coming from the government, but of course from other stakeholders, and it also can create the flow of concessional finance to the country. I think that's from my standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Edwin. So I'd like to invite Pak David, Pak, please, Pak.
So yeah, just briefly, and I see Director Sinacruz's presentation is up, and so I'll be brief so we can hear from him. I'll just highlight that from a financial point of view, that we are using a traditional finance approach, which is re-leveraging the investment, but also combining that with concessional capital, that we can really maximize the retirement of the coal-fired power plant. So it's really trying to do something that is innovative, together with using traditional approaches and concessional financing for this first transaction. But also, if we can later use this to demonstrate the emission reductions, we could use carbon credits or produce carbon credits that can be monetized, and that could minimize the need for concessional finance. So it's, I think, very exciting to use concessional funds at this stage, and then later using a market-based mechanism, using the taxonomy to allow for these investments, as well as the carbon finance methodology to bring in other market-based approaches. So we're really excited about that. And then on the just transition, this is a challenging aspect because we're trying to design for to mitigate the just transition impacts at the end of life for this coal-fired power plant, which is estimated under the transaction at around 2037. What I see as a real exciting opportunity within Indonesia, as a country that has significant mineral resources, wants to develop a clean energy economy. So in battery production, as well as other clean energy technologies, this provides that opportunity to shift employment, which is one key element of just transition, from, say, working at a coal plant to then being employed in clean energy technology production. So I think that ambition as part of Indonesia's broader plans really supports energy transition very well. Let me stop there and pass it back to the moderator.
Thank you, Pak David. So since Pak Michael's ready, so please Pak, you can start your presentation, Pak.
Okay, thank you and good morning to everyone again, and apologies for the technical problems. Let me start my presentation. So my presentation will cover three parts. I'll be I'll be discussing first the energy situation of the country, the energy plan, which is our action plan or the roadmap for the energy transition, and lastly on the ETM. Next slide. Next. Okay. So currently, if our total primary energy supply, as you can see here, that we are highly dependent on fossil fuel. So it's about 67% of our primary energy supply. And among the fossil fuels, we are highly dependent on coal and oil. And the RE only contributed around 33 or 34% of our primary energy supply. Next slide, please. Next. Okay. When it comes to total final energy consumption, the major users of our energy are the households and transport. About 60% or more than 60% of our final energy consumption was consumed by these two sectors. And the right hand or the pie chart on the right is by fuel. So we are heavily dependent on oil, about 50%, specifically for the transport. Next. So let me now go to the power generation. As you can see here, that our power generation, we are highly dependent on coal. So it poses a challenge for us because about 60% of our power generation in 2022 was contributed by coal. While renewable energy, although the aggregate capacity of renewable energy contributed 29% of our total capacity, but in terms of generation, the share of RE in 2022 was only 22%, while we also have a significant share from gas, about 16% of our power generation. So let me now go to the Philippine Energy Plan. So we are currently, our current plan right now covers the period 2020 to 2040. And these are the targets that we set for this plan. We are aiming for the increase in RE share to 35% by 2040 and by 35% by 2030 rather, and increasing further to 50% by 2040. We are also looking at the penetration or the accelerated implementation of our energy efficiency and conservation programs that will realize energy savings. And we also looking at the penetration of electric vehicle, although we're going to revise the target since we do have the comprehensive EV roadmap right now in place, and the application of technological or information and communication technology, and lastly on energy resiliency, climate proofing of energy ecosystem. Next. So as I mentioned, we are currently updating the plan, and we are going to set a much ambitious target. So our reference will be the 50% of RE share by 2040 up to 2050 in high RE with low OSW. We are targeting that the RE share will increase to at least 60% of our power generation by 2050. So there will be coal retirements. So those that will be retired are these plants are those inefficient plants with high incidence of outages, as well as already reached the economic and technical life. So there's another one, and aside from the coal retirement, we are also looking at the development of nuclear energy under this scenario. Under the clean energy scenario too, we're going to have a higher penetration from offshore wind, and we are looking at the development of about 50 gigawatt of offshore wind, because there was a study conducted by World Bank that the Philippines has a huge potential for offshore wind, about 178 gigawatts. So we have issued several contracts on this, and because we open the RE industry to 100% foreign ownership. So there are now, I think, 3 service contracts with 100% foreign owned company. Next slide, please. So let me now go to the previous slide. So let me now go to the energy transition mechanism. So in line with the Philippine Transition Initiative, so we are now taking advantage of the opportunities to implement various programs and projects that are geared towards consumer protection, use of new, emerging, and more efficient energy technologies, the development and utilization of RE and other clean energy sources. And to keep up with the current trend, the Philippine government, through the Department of Energy, has been collaborating with the various development partners, the international organization, including through the energy transition mechanism. Next, please. So this is the ETM, the indicative timeline for the ETM. The ETM has been developed to leverage market-based approaches to accelerate transition from fossil to clean energy. And in October of 2021, the Philippines was selected to develop an investment plan for the accelerating coal transition program of the climate investment funds under the ADB. And the main objective of the ACT program is to tackle key barriers related to governance, people, and infrastructure, as well as to address funding gaps leading to the successful implementation of country-level strategies associated with the Kickstart projects, to include even building support at the local and regional levels within the country, as well as to accelerate the retirement of existing coal assets. The 2 CIF ICT investment plan, this is the Multilateral Development Bank's missions, were conducted in partnership with our Department of Finance and my department, the Department of Energy, in August of last year and in March of this year, purposely to plan and prepare for the investment plan for the access of this fund on the accelerated coal transition. The CIF for Clean Technology or fund committee reviewed the Philippines proposal for a 6-month extension on the submission of country's investment plan. So the request was approved last June of this year, and the Philippines investment plan shall be submitted to CIF by November of this year. Next. So last August 4 of this year, the ADB, together with the Department of Energy, World Bank, and the International Finance Corporation, held the first stakeholders engagement meeting for the Philippine CIF ACT investment plan. And we received more than 120 representatives from the Philippine government, NGOs, civil society, among others, private sector. And as a follow-up activity is to conduct in October a workshop to finalize the investment plan to be submitted, as I mentioned earlier, in November of this year. And I think that's it for the ETM. And I'd like to emphasize here that when we discuss this ETM with ADB, we are proposing that we should also look at the repurposing of coal power plants, not just only retirement, as well as looking at the impacts to the workers. We need to be included in the investment plan should be the upskilling, reskilling, upskilling of the workers to be affected when we're going to close down the coal mines, retire or repurpose some of our coal power plants. Not only the workers, but even the micro enterprises hosting the facilities, both the coal power plants and the mining areas. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Pak Michael, for presentation on the ETM and energy policy planning in the Philippines. Because of the time constraint, so actually I would like to invite maybe participant to also raise some question, but maybe I have to I said finish the session a bit because of the time constraint. And if I may to sum up of the presentation from the three speakers. So from the Indonesia, I mean from the Pelabuhan Ratu, we can say that the preparations towards the implementation of the TM based on the country platform manager perspective is that we need to find some fine-tune between the financial and market perspective and how the government may provide some support to that. And from the Cirebon, some further aspects it's in the place, including launching studies on the just transition and as well as the environment and social audit, as well as further discussion between the owner or the shareholders of the Cirebon with the relevant government institution. And from the Philippines, I think there are some steps moving forward, and we are expecting that in the future maybe some of the implementation of ETM both in the Indonesia as well as in the Philippines can be the best practices implementation of ETM in the world. I think I have to stop there due to the time constraint, and thank you very much for participants and for sure for the three prominent speakers for sharing in the today's seminar. And I will give it back time and place to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you.
Again, thank you for Mr. Nur Syaifuddin and also our honorable speakers for the insightful discussions. So ladies and gentlemen, now we have discussed two subtopics about introductions and vulnerable of energy transition in Indonesia, and also that has been completely delivered by our speakers. And also we have discussed about the second topics, which is about country update energy transition mechanism from our speakers, Mr. Edwin as the President Director from PTSMI, and also Mr. David from ADB, and also the third speaker, Mr. Michael from Department of Energy Philippines. But now, ladies and gentlemen, we still have one last session of today's seminar. The last session is about road to just and affordable transitions. Ladies and gentlemen, this session will provide a venue for speakers to explain about green taxonomy in Indonesia, and also will highlight just transitions and strategic environment and social assessment on the implementations of energy transition mechanism. Absolutely. Before we start the third sessions, let me introduce our moderator, Ms. Pande Putu Oka Kusumawaradani. She is head of Center for State Revenue Policy, Fiscal Policy Agency of Ministry of Finance of Republic of Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Pande Putu Oka Kusumawardani.
Okay, still good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Now we have come to the third sessions of the today's seminar of energy transitions mechanisms, ASEAN country updates, road to just and affordable transitions. And my name is Pande Putu Kusumawardani, and I will be your moderator for this session. And in these sessions, we will have 4 prominent speakers who will share their valuable thought and also experiences. Our first speaker, Ms. Mutia Khairani, Senior Climate Finance Specialist from ASEAN Development Bank. Our second speaker would be Mr. Joko Triharyanto, President Director of the Indonesian Environment Fund. Our third speaker is Mr. Eugene Wong, apologize, Monetary Authority of Singapore, Vice Chair of the ASEAN Taxonomy Board, who will join our today's event online. And our fourth speaker, Ms. Henriette Verjuman, the first Counselor for Environment, Climate Action and Digital Cooperation at the European Union Delegation to Indonesia. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our distinguished speakers. So in this session, we will be covering the discussion on carbon pricing, carbon market, and the relevant role of the Indonesian Environmental Fund in carbon market, carbon fund management to support the just and affordable transitions of energy in Indonesia, and highlight the relevant works under the strategic environment and social assessment on the implementations of energy transitions mechanism. We will also discuss about the important role of the green taxonomy in ASEAN and also in European Union to establish common ground and also key enabling policy or instruments that perhaps can support energy transitions in ASEAN. And before we start the discussion, let me explain a few details about the seminar. There will be, each panelist will be provided presentations time for about 10 minutes, and there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, it's time to hear from our first speaker, Ms. Mutia Khairani. Ms. Khairani is a climate change specialist of the Energy Transitions Mechanism team in the Southeast Asia Energy Division ASEAN Development Bank. She is leading the ADB's engagement with Indonesia ETM country platform under the Ministry of Finance. And prior to this assignment, Ms. Khairani has previously worked in ADB as the risk management specialist in the Office of Risk Management and Project Portfolio Analysis. She is graduated from the National University of Singapore with master's degree in environmental management and is certified sustainable and climate risk professional. So Ms. Mutia will highlight just transitions and CESA on the implementations of ETM, and you will have 10 minutes to deliver your presentations. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ibu Oka, for the introduction. So a very good afternoon, everyone, in the seminar. So please screen the slide. Okay, the next slide, please. Maybe I'll start. Yeah, so just would like to emphasize that ADB supports the government of Indonesia in its energy transition journey. It has been a long-standing partnership since 2021 when Indonesia joined the Southeast Asia ETM partnership, which continue in the G20, as well as continuously we support also the JETP operationalization of the Secretariat. So yeah, the previous speakers, including Pak Febrio, also already highlighted the national commitment for decarbonization and energy transition. So I would not repeat again, but I'd like to emphasize that ADB role is really to work together with the government to crowd in public and finance sector partners and to support just transition and ensure the climate credential of the ETM transaction and harness carbon finance mechanism. Next slide, please. So this slide will show you the 4P approach, which encompasses the ETM towards just and affordable transition in Indonesia. The previous speaker, including David, has already highlighted the policy, power, and partnership approach that ADB has adopted. And today's presentation, I'll emphasize the people aspect because the people pillar here, where ADB aims to ensure that workers and communities that will be affected by the energy transition mechanism, by the retirement of the coal-fired power plant, are properly supported. And we are mobilizing various resources to support, including the analytics and capacity building to support the Indonesian government, as well as coordinate with other initiatives such as Climate Investment Fund and the JETP. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about the ETM piloting and study that we're building upon, we have 4 components here, or parts that works together as an interlinked puzzle. So on the left side here that you see are the regional and country feasibility study that covers technical, legal, regulatory, and financial assessment. So the left side here, we look at the elements such as power plant selection based on multi-criteria analysis, the impact on the system, financial structuring analysis, and including commercial and legal structure. And when we look at the right side of the screen, we look at the 2 pieces of puzzle there, safeguards and just transition. And these 2 underpins the people aspect of the ETM. And supporting just transition, protecting livelihood, and providing affordable electricity. So all these 4 components are interrelated and inseparable. Next slide, please. So when we zoom in into the 2 people pillar elements here, safeguard and just transition, what do they mean? What are these? And just to emphasize also what Pak Febrio mentioned in his opening speech, that the ultimate goal is to seamlessly attain a low carbon economy while simultaneously safeguarding our economic growth and preserving employment. And this is where the people pillar comes in by looking at 2 aspects. The first one is safeguard, and this is underpinned by ADB safeguard policy. And safeguard here is really looking at managing environmental and social risk. And at the strategic level, we're coming in with the strategic environmental and social assessment, which is termed at SESA, and this is looking at strategic national country level. And at the asset level, this is to ensure the due diligence addresses adverse impact, both direct and indirect, and to ensure compliance with the safeguard requirements. On the lower end of the slide, we're looking at just transition, and this is underpinned in Paris Agreement. It is part of the preamble of the Paris Agreement, and it is depicted in the Multilateral Development Bank high-level just transition principle. And beyond compliance, beyond managing the environmental and social risk, this is to plan for transition that ensures socio-economic inclusion. So in this aspect, we're looking at jobs, income, gender, even fiscal and migration, social aspect, financing, and other opportunities. And the just transition aspect, we'll be looking at mitigating impact at direct, indirect, and induced level. So both work, safeguard and just transition, are interrelated, they're coordinated. There has been feedback between the two work streams because both of them are looking at impact assessment, mitigation frameworks and plans, as well as stakeholder engagement, consultation, social dialogue. It also looks at the necessary policy and regulatory condition to attain the just transition, and both are really Paris-aligned focused. So next slide, please. And let me move on to briefly on the second part of my presentation, focusing on the strategic environmental and social assessment. So if you're looking at this slide, it describes the two scopes of safeguards. The first one on top is the strategic national level, which will look at policy, plan, and program. And we're looking at this assessment at Southeast Asia level, national, provincial, and including the district level. So we have done the assessment in Jawa Barat, Sulawesi Selatan, and Kalimantan Timur. Those are the three major regions that are sampled with a very prominent impact on coal-fired power plant operations as well as the supply chain. And at the lower level, if you can see the ASEAN environmental impact and social impact assessment, those are at the project level whereby safeguards are being applied at the asset level to ensure the compliance to ADB safeguard requirement. Next slide, please. So we have done the strategic environmental and social assessment. This is an ongoing assessment, still ongoing. We have been working in collaboration with Ministry of Finance, very much appreciating their championing this work. We are looking at addressing the key environmental, socio-economic, health and safety issues and risk, addressing the risk and adverse impact, and conduct recommendation on the mitigating measure. So the national workshop, there has been 4 rounds happening, and yeah, Pak Joko has actively participated in all the national workshop also, and very strong involvement by the BKF colleague here from Ministry of Finance. And we also have conducted the regional level at provincial and district level in the 3 provinces previously mentioned. And this involved not just the government element, but also business, civil society, communities, as well as academia. Next slide, please. And let me quickly, with my remaining 2 minutes, to move on the just transition aspect. As I explained before, this is longer term, this is beyond assessing the risk and impact that previously being looked at in the safeguard element. So just transition will bring this forward into a coherent just transition planning that will address transition towards decarbonized and green economy, and therefore it needs to address these 4 actors here: workers, supplier, communities, and consumer along the supply chain of coal. And if we're talking about energy transition mechanism and coal phase out, the actor here are along the supply chain of coal. And next slide, please. Again, if you're familiar with this circle, to see the overlapping of scope from the Southeast Asia regional level, national, subnational, community, and project level. And in just transition approach, it is comprehensively addressed all the way even to the project level. So the just transition objective needs to be translated at all this layer, including at the project level. And the scope and the approach will be different but interrelated. So in the national level, obviously the capacity of national government to look at the direct, indirect, and induced impact, including the impact towards fiscal and tax and national system will be looked at. And then going down deeper into the project level, this is where it starts to overlap with the safeguard element, because safeguard will be looking at social and environmental aspect, but also looking at the just transition plan for the worker, labor union, women, communities surrounding the area, and how this will be embedded into the project level transaction. And this has not been done before, so we are currently piloting it, as David has explained previously, to conduct this just transition assessment, both at all level here, as well as the just transition plan that can be executed at the project level. Next slide, please. So for Indonesia, what we are working together with the Ministry of Finance and the stakeholder are looking at the just transition approach at 3 levels, and this is focusing on the ETM, focusing on the early retirement of coal plants, and this is where SESA, the strategic assessment, will act as the feedback mechanism with the just transition framework, shaping planning and policy recommendation. At the national level, will be coordinated by the Ministry of Finance through technical assistance, but we are also looking at applying this at the country platform level with PTSMI, and then down to the asset level for each individual power plant, just transition approach will be applied. And this will be synthesized into mitigating intervention and financing plan at those 3 different levels. So the next slide, please. I'll just wrap up with this final slide. So I'd like to just to emphasize ADB commitment to safeguard and just transition. It is a critical path for implementing the energy transition mechanism. And it works also in coordination with the JETP. Well, JETP looks beyond ETM per se. It also includes 4 other or more investment areas, and this will serve as an input to that. So if you look at the what's next, what's ahead, the left side will look at the near to medium term output of this activity, which is still on progress. The SESA for ETM in Indonesia will culminate with establishment of the Strategic Environmental and Social Management Plan, and this will serve as a recommendation for the Indonesian government to manage the environmental and social risk and to enable the just energy transition. In parallel, the just transition activity is also happening, as earlier mentioned, at 3 levels. This will be delivered through technical assistance as well as capacity development. Down at the pilot transaction level, we are working on the just transition impact assessment and piloting the just transition framework plan, so the plan that will be applied at the asset level. And in the meantime, the stakeholder engagement will be continuing. And this will be done in coordination, in supporting the development of institutional and policy framework and financing approaches to implement just transition in Indonesia through the energy transition mechanism. I'll conclude there, and thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Ibu Mutia Khairani, for highlighting many of the process that have been undertaken and the noteworthy findings that SESA has in ensuring the energy transition process is carried on in a fair and affordable manner, while minimizing impact of the affected communities due to the initiative of CFPPs. Next, let me introduce our second speaker, Mr. Joko Triharyanto. He is currently the CEO of Indonesia Environment Fund, Ministry of Finance of Indonesia. And in this role, he is responsible for formulating financing to support the mitigation and adaptations of climate change and other activities under environment issues. And he is also an associate lecturer for several reputable universities in Indonesia, such as Faculty of Economic and Business University of Indonesia and University of Pajajaran. Before joining the Indonesia Environment Fund, he worked for Fiscal Policy Agency as a senior researcher since 2006. And today, Mr. Joko will talk about the Indonesian Environment Fund roles in carbon fund management. But before that, Pak Joko, the Indonesian Environmental Fund is currently entrusted with the mandate of managing environmental fund in Indonesia, aiming to drive mitigation and adaptation actions within the country, while concurrently empowering communities to engage in climate-related initiatives. So in the context of energy transitions management process and under the role of IAF, in what extent the IAF has taken steps to fulfill this role in this regard. So please, Pak Joko.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. But this is quite tragic, yeah, because we talk about the energy efficiency, but we are really cold, yeah, in this room. We talk about the climate change, but the temperature is quite low. Yeah, this is quite tragic. Just to continue what colleagues from ADB, Ibu Rani already present and already mentioned. So please let us introduce that we are from the Indonesian Environment Fund, and we just talk about our mandate, new mandate, yeah, managing carbon funds, yeah. When we already launched next September perhaps, because our colleagues from OJK, yeah, will launch as soon as possible. And besides we talk about the carbon fund, actually we can also support the ETM itself from our portfolio, because we already have many experience, yeah, deal and also engage with many NGO and community-based level approach. So this is quite interesting how to connect the ETM itself, yeah, with managing NGO voices, because if we look from the PTSMI perspective, they are, of course, they are only focusing on, well, from the financing side. And if we remember from the previous speaker, particularly from Paul Putar-Putar, yeah, on the first session, if we look from ETM itself and also JETP coalition, we know that we can find a very crucial aspect, just transition. And this is also very important for ADB. Yeah, that's why this is quite interesting if Indonesia Environment Fund could be also manage just transition aspect, as well as distribute and also managing the voices from NGO, just to fulfill the mandatory structure from ETM itself. But in this moment, I think we try to really focus on the carbon fund management. We start from the first slide, yeah, perhaps we start from our Indonesia commitment, yeah, just to recap and also recall what Fabio mentioned on the opening session, that the government quite ambitious, because we already increased our commitment from NDC 29% to become 41%, and increase release the new document under the enhanced NDC, increasing until 31.8%, and also from the international side, the government commitment could be 43%. And this is also quite interesting, because last year actually the government also released another document, long-term strategy for low carbon and climate resilient, and also giving the commitment towards the net zero emission 2060 or sooner. And this is quite interesting if we look from ETM principle. ETM could be the accelerator for the government from Indonesia to get the sooner from the net zero emission targeted. Next. From the first slide, we can look from the government commitment, but all the commitment must be supported by money, by the financing or funding. And based on our calculation, third biennial updated report, the government requirement funding to achieve national determined contribution 2030 quite big. We calculate, the government calculate almost 247 billion. And this big money cannot fulfill only from the government budget, because the Ministry of Finance calculation through the climate budget taking annually, the capacity of government budget no more than 34% annually to get the achievement of, to support the achievement of NDC 2030. So the fiscal gap or the financial gap is quite high, huge. That's why the government established Indonesia Environment Fund. Next slide, please. So Indonesia Environment Fund actually established since 2019. And this is quite interesting because, next please, because we serve more than one line minister. We serve almost 10 line minister mandatory under the NDC sector, main sector under the NDC. Next, please. So if we look from our committee, we have almost 10 line minister. Next, please. So this is our business process. Like I mentioned before, the Indonesia Environment Fund has the almost 10 line minister, majority the main sector under the NDC. So we can see our bosses is not only one, but 10. Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Ministry of Fisheries and Maritime, and so on. And this is quite interesting because if we look from our thematic, next please. If we look from our thematic, we also put the high priority on the affordable clean energy as well as the energy transition. And this is our current portfolio. So you can see that BPDLH quite active, even we are still young. Since 2019, we are very active to collect money, particularly from the international side, but from the MDBs or big philanthropy. This is our portfolio now. Consists of 3 different funding instruments: grant, loan, or investment, and also endowment. If we look from the total money under the BPDLH or Indonesia Environment Fund management now, almost 1.5 billion USD. And this is quite interesting. If we look from the potential businesses, next please. If we look from the potential businesses, if we reverse from the government regulation, presidential regulation number 98, 2021, Indonesia Environment Fund also give mandate, priority to manage carbon fund or carbon revenue. So if we reverse from this regulation, presidential regulation as well as ministerial regulation, Indonesia Environment Fund will manage revenue from carbon trade and also result-based payment. So this is new challenge if we link with the ETM activity, how to connect revenue, because Paul already mentioned under the JETP and as well as ADB now still on the period to develop new methodology to calculate carbon producing by early retirement. So next challenge perhaps how the Indonesia Environment Fund as the institution giving mandate to collect and manage carbon revenue and then give back to the institution already done with the ETM activity. Perhaps we can discuss later, yeah, with ADB, with the JETP, because now we are still on the initial state to develop business process from our new mandate, yeah, a new regulation on the carbon pricing, managing carbon revenue, and then give back to the actor. If we reverse from the government regulation, Indonesia will have 4 different actors on the carbon trading. The first actor is the state government or the central government, and the second actor is the local government, and the third actor is the private and corporation, and the last actor is the community-based level. So if we reverse from the ETM activity, this is quite interesting, how BPDLH will disperse to give a support, yeah, development, and also give the result from carbon and deliver to the carbon actor. So this is my last slide, moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Joko, for sharing with us the IAF's role in carbon fund management. And we understand that from your presentation, the role of the IAF is certainly crucial in improving the inclusiveness of mitigation adaptations actions within the energy transitions initiatives in the country. So now let us move to the third speaker, which will highlight the ASEAN taxonomy for sustainable finance version 2. We will, our third speaker is Mr. Eugene Wong. He will be present online. I hope you're there, Mr. Eugene Wong. Can you hear our voice? Okay, there you are. So before that, I would introduce our third speaker. Mr. Eugene Wong is the CEO of Sustainable Finance Institute Asia, an independent institute established to catalyze ideas on sustainable finance at the policy level in ASEAN, as well as propel actions in support of those policy area. The institute is the host of the ASEAN Taxonomy Board, and he previously served as the Managing Director, Corporate Finance and Investments of the Securities Commission Malaysia, and was closely involved in the ASEAN Sustainable Capital Market initiatives, including the ASEAN Green, Social and Sustainability Bond Standards. Mr. Eugene Wong will highlight the ASEAN Taxonomy for Sustainable Finance version 2. Are you ready to deliver the presentations, or?
Yes, I am, Ibu. Thank you very much for the kind introduction.
Okay.
And I apologize to
Please,
everyone
the time is yours,
for
yeah.
not being able. Can you hear me? That's good. And I apologize to everyone for not being there in person. If I can have the first slide, please. Thank you. And the next slide. So I'd like to start off with what Pak Joko said just now. And what he mentioned is actually very important, that the achievement of decarbonization must be supported by money, and government money is not enough to do this. So this is the reason why we have a taxonomy. And for those of you who are new to taxonomies, a taxonomy is actually a classification system. And this particular classification we have under the ASEAN taxonomy is actually meant to help us orient capital towards sustainable activities and away from non-sustainable activities. So the ASEAN taxonomy was actually endorsed by the ASEAN finance ministers and central bank governors meeting back in 2021. And the AFMGM was very clear because they wanted the ASEAN taxonomy to firstly be the overarching guide for all our member states, complementing their respective national sustainability initiatives and serving as ASEAN's common language for sustainable finance. What does that mean? It means that every country can still have national taxonomies to address national interests and national priorities, but the ASEAN taxonomy would be the common platform for all of us to. Now, because of that, the individual circumstances of all our member states could be taken into account, and the taxonomy could be inclusive, it could be beneficial to everyone. Importantly, the FMGM wanted the taxonomy to be able to facilitate an orderly and effective transition towards a sustainable ASEAN. Next slide, please. So the first version of the ASEAN taxonomy was released in November 2010, and the second, November 2021, my apologies. And the second version was released in March this year. So the at the 42nd ASEAN Summit, the chairman had said that the introduction of the technical screening criteria in the taxonomy to address the early retirement of coal plants in the region is actually something that is going to be useful because it will help support the orderly, just, and affordable transition that the region needs. Next slide, please. So let me quickly share with you what the taxonomy looks like. The taxonomy has 4 environmental objectives, which includes climate change, mitigation, climate change adaptation, protection of healthy ecosystems and biodiversity, promoting resource resilience, and transition to a circular economy. It has also safeguards in essential criteria. So it has 3 essential criteria to provide safeguards. The first is that while you actually may support a particular environmental objective with your economic activity, you should not do harm to another environmental objective. That is what is meant by do no significant harm. The second is that we recognize that in this part of the world, we cannot flick a switch and turn green or become sustainable overnight. We may have situations that we have to remedy because there's harm caused to another environmental objective because we're trying to promote one. So we are giving people space and time to be able to remediate. And the third actually is on social aspects. So while the taxonomy does not specifically proactively promote just transitions, what it does do is that it supports just transitions through ensuring that human rights as well as community efforts are taken into account. Now, when I said the taxonomy doesn't proactively promote just transitions, I meant that from a assessment perspective on the action on a particular group of people. But the taxonomy does specifically promote just transitions by allowing a pathway through its multi-tiered system to actually promote the gradual orderly transition of our economies into a sustainable economy. The taxonomy has 2 components. The first is actually a foundation framework. The foundation framework actually is a principles-based system, and that is meant to help our member states who don't have enough data at the moment immediately start the sustainability journey by relying on principles-based approach. And then for those who are ready, we have a plus standard that is based on the technical screening criteria. The taxonomy covers 6 focus sectors that will encapsulate 85% of emissions in the region, and also 3 enabling sectors that will support the 6 focus sectors in decarbonizing. So what is really unusual about the taxonomy is that for the foundation framework, we use a traffic light system, but for the plus standard, we actually have more than 1 threshold for eligibility under the taxonomy. So in the EU taxonomy, you only see 1 threshold, but we have up to 3 because, as I mentioned just now, the whole purpose is to support a transition for our member states. Next slide, please. Right, so when I talked about the tiers, what I meant is that if we look at our plus standard, we can have up to 3 thresholds. The first threshold, which is the most ambitious, is something that we want to align as far as possible to the EU taxonomy, and that meets a 1.5 degree commitment or goal. But what happens if you can't reach this, but you are trying? So we provide a second threshold. This is called Tier 2, which is a performance level that's contributing significantly but not meeting the ambitions of the first tier, the most ambitious tier. And what happens if you can't reach Tier 2 today? You can start off with Tier 3 first and gradually work your way to Tier 2. Tier 3 is something that is not meeting Tier 1, Tier 2, but business as usual. And over time, Tier 2 and Tier 3 will be retired. So what we do is we move things forward. Next slide, please. Right, and the next slide. So I did explain about the traffic light system just now, and I won't go into that because we're short of time. Can I have the next slide, please? And the next slide. So how do the tiers work? Let me give you an example. So in the production of energy, for instance, Tier 1 is the most ambitious tier, and it has a 1.5 degree alignment. So the threshold for that tier is aligned to the EU taxonomy. You cannot produce more than 100 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour. In Tier 2, it's not more than 100, but it's more than 100, but less than 425. And Tier 3, it's more than 425, but less than 510. So over time, Tier 2 and Tier 3 will be sunset, and we expect everyone to continue their journey forward towards Tier 1. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this session is really to talk about coal phase-outs, and for the ASEAN taxonomy, the ASEAN Taxonomy Board thoroughly considered how and where coal phase-outs can play an important role in decarbonization to support the Paris Agreement. And in order to respond to the diverse needs of our member states and to facilitate this orderly and just transition that we spoke of, the ATB has developed a technical screening criteria for coal phase-out, which aims to promote inclusivity without compromising the credibility of the whole taxonomy. The ATB knew that this was going to be a very novel approach. In fact, as you know, the ASEAN taxonomy is the first taxonomy to incorporate a coal phase-out criteria. But it believed that if it's approached correctly, it will provide a powerful tool for transition. Next slide, please. So, under the ASEAN taxonomy, a coal phase-out can be classified as green, Amber Tier 2 or Amber Tier 3 under the technical screening criteria. So green is a very, very high standard because we require the phase-out to be aligned to a 1.5 degree outcome consistent with the IA net zero emissions pathway. For Amber Tier 2, there is a bit more latitude given, and that particular transaction only has to comply with a 1.5 degree outcome derived from a regional country-specific pathway. But it has to be science-based either way. And Tier 3 is, again, even more liberal, and it is actually just based on the commercial life of the plant and also when the plant is built. So next slide, please. The idea actually of really having this taxonomy criteria put out was because if we have individual financial institutions coming out with their own criteria, then what you will have is a lack of consistency and lack of agreement. So this will hinder action. And at the same time, many FIs just simply don't have the resources to develop their own criteria. By coming up with this, the ASEAN Taxonomy Board has actually put out to the international community, to the financing community, all stakeholders, what is the balance between the reality in Southeast Asia, as well as an ambition that is sufficiently credible to help us play a very, very key role in the global decarbonization effort. So there was a lot of support for the coal phase-out. Ibu Sri Mulyani herself talked about how the coal phase-out criteria will help countries like Indonesia transition. Next slide, please. Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong from Singapore also talked about how the taxonomy can help provide clarity to investors and financial institutions on the transitions that are taking place in our part of the world. And next slide, please. So the ASEAN taxonomy, particularly the coal phase-out criteria, received actually quite a bit of attention. And initially, I would say that there's been a lot of excitement on its launch, and actually we have been receiving a lot of feedback. We have been receiving a lot of requests to discuss the coal phase-out criteria further by international parties, and we see that this is a very important step moving forward. So next step, please. Right. So for those of you who want the ASEAN taxonomy, you can download it at these particular websites. So with that, actually, because we're running short of time, thank you very much, and we can take questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eugene Wong, for the very comprehensive explanations about the ASEAN taxonomy too, as well as to show us how it has incorporated the early retirement coal-fired power plant within its framework, as well as support the just transitions by providing opportunity in a way of gradual approach of energy transitions applied in the region. With that, we can move to the last speaker. Our last speaker is Ms. Henriette Verjuman. She is the first counselor for environment, climate actions, and digital cooperations at the European Union delegations to Indonesia, based in Jakarta. From 2014 until 2020, she was working as head of section in the European Union delegations to India, responsible for cooperations in the area of environment, mobility, urbanizations, energy, and climate change. Among other, has created the India-EU partnerships on water, clean energy and climate, smart and sustainable urbanizations, and circular economy. Ms. Henriette Verjuman will inform us about the EU taxonomy, and it will be, we are very looking forward to your explanations in this regard. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. I know that I'm the last speaker, so I hope that I can still manage to keep you a little bit interested. This is a very difficult topic, but the previous speaker made it already quite a bit easier for me. So I can see my presentation. You can see it as well. That's great. Okay, so I think you are all aware that the European Union has a quite ambitious climate and environment policy. We call it the European Green Deal, which is our sustainable growth strategy. And among others, that strategy is supposed to help us achieve 25% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and to reach climate neutrality by 2050. So, of course, in order to be able to achieve this, taxonomy is a really important tool for us to make sure that we understand what kind of investments are actually taking us in this direction. So next slide, please. So the European Union started working, or the European Commission started working towards the sustainable finance framework already in 2018 with a sustainable finance action plan, which was a renewed sustainable finance strategy, and that was announced in the European Green Deal that I mentioned. So in the last just 5 years, we have managed to put forward a large number of things that you see here on the screen, including some very important regulations, disclosure systems, green bond standards, and benchmarks, and then, of course, what I'm here to talk about today, the EU taxonomy. Next slide, please. This is, oh, that jumped very quickly. That's fine, because I didn't want to say much about the previous slide anyway. So, the EU taxonomy really serves three purposes. It provides clarity on what is an environmentally sustainable activity and under which circumstances. It measures the degree of sustainability of an investment and of green activities of companies. And it helps investors and companies to plan and report on the transition by setting objectives and the direction of travel for different economic activities. In other words, the EU taxonomy is an important market transparency tool that helps direct investments in the economic activities that is most needed for the green transition. Next slide. Okay, now it really jumps very quickly. Anyway, so before I go to this, I will just say that the taxonomy is designed to be updated regularly as technologies and policies change. It's technology neutral, it helps foster transparency, and it is not a mandatory list of projects to invest in. It doesn't rate the greenness of companies, and it doesn't judge the financial performance of investments. So, and also it's not the entire truth. There may be other projects that are not classified in this taxonomy that are still very good and green, and projects that are going in the right direction. So the taxonomy regulation, so now I'm a little bit uncertain. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, previous slide. It's a little bit confusing. Anyway, so the taxonomy regulation entered into force in July 2020, and it establishes the basis for the EU taxonomy, and it sets out 4 overarching conditions that an economic activity has to meet in order to qualify as environmentally sustainable. So first of all, it has to substantially contribute to one of 6 environmental objectives. We heard 4 environmental objectives in the previous presentation for ASEAN. We have 6 environmental objectives outlined in the EU taxonomy. So this first criteria is about making a positive contribution. The second one is about not doing significantly harm of the environment objectives, so that's the safeguard. And then it has to be carried out in compliance with minimum safeguards, and it has to comply with certain technical screening criteria. Next, please. Okay, so here we see the different delegated acts under the regulation, which are a climate delegated act that entered into force already in January 2022, which covers climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And then as I mentioned, there are 6 different parts of the regulation, and the 4 other ones are under the Environment Delegated Act that you see here on the bottom: circular economy, water and marine resources, pollution prevention and control, and biodiversity and ecosystems. Next slide, please. Here you see the entire activities, the entire sectors that are covered, a huge number of sectors and activities. We have already the climate taxonomy that is already in force, covers more than 100 activities in the sectors that are responsible for more than 2/3 of the EU's emission. And as I mentioned, in 2021 we presented new criteria for activities that make a substantial contribution to the other 4 sectors, so the environment sectors. Next slide, please. So, besides the taxonomy, we are also making important steps forward towards fighting greenwashing and other types of misinformation with the adoption of a proposal on the transparency and integrity of environmental and social governance rating activities. So the key aim of this proposal is to increase transparency on ESG ratings, methodologies, objectives and characteristics, and data sources. It also aims to increase clarity on the operation of the ESG rating providers, in particularly to prevent and mitigate potential risks associated with conflicts of interest. Next slide, please. So I would, like the previous speaker again, warmly invite you to take a look at our website, where we have introduced a new EU taxonomy navigator that explains in a simple, as simple as possible on this topic, and practical manner what taxonomy is and how it can help both companies and the financial sector. Our priority is now to make the taxonomy and the existing framework as usable and as efficient and effective as possible. So with these measures, we hope that it will be easier for companies that really want to use these tools and to invest that into the sustainable transition. Next slide. So, as you can see, we now have the main element of the sustainable finance framework in place. And this leads to, as I mentioned, informed investment decisions for the transition to a climate neutral and sustainable economy. The benefits from applying this framework will increase over time, are expected to increase over time with the progressive availability of data. We will also continue to make it easier and more efficient to use the system by continuing to develop the practical guidance for market players. But of course, the overall success of this sustainable framework, and that's why I'm really happy to be here today, really hinges on the strong cooperation that we have also at the international level. So we are very committed, the EU is very committed and remains very committed to work with international partners and jurisdictions to make sure that we can have international interoperability and make sure that we understand fully how the system works in the different parts of the world. So with ASEAN, we already have a very good dialogue on environment, on climate change, and just this year we've had our first EU-ASEAN energy dialogue. I must say that in any of the dialogues that I have been there, we have never talked about taxonomy, so maybe that's being done in different groups, so you are all taking part, but we would really welcome to have much better and more detailed discussions on this in the future. So with this, I think I managed to speak so fast that I'm even ahead of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Henrietta. With those, I think we all have heard from all the speakers on the topics that were being the main issue in the just transitions of energy in these new emerging initiatives. As a follow-up to the presentations of our distinguished presenters, maybe I would like to ask more questions to Ibu Mutia. How is the involvement when you do the SESA? The local community and the local government in the preparations of the strategic environment and also social assessment, are they heavily involved in the initiatives? And is there also local businesses stakeholders that also included in the initiatives?
Thank you, Bu Oka, for the follow-up question. Yeah, so the SESA, Strategic Environmental and Social Assessment, also go deep into the provincial and district level to really get the feel, yeah, from the ground on how they will approach or act upon the energy transition agenda. So we do engage with the local government as well as the local business and communities as well as the civil society organization. They do participate in our regional consultation as well as the national level workshop consultation. And we gather a lot of salient input which is really helping us in furthering the recommendation for the strategic and environmental management plan that will be completed hopefully within this year and be passed on to Ministry of Finance. And we do discover that the region, the subnational government, they probably not very well informed on the energy transition agenda, on the coal retirement agenda, but once they're informed, once they understand about it, they prefer really to have an expedited and concrete transaction action, such as reskilling and acceleration for the new renewable energy development, as well as seeking support from the national level government to provide adequate incentive policy support regulatory support to enable this to happen at the ground level. So this needs a coordinated support from the national government, which your ministry, I think, is taking a lead on it. Another point of consideration is that, just transition may need also financing consideration to support the acceleration of this transition and maintain a regional economic growth. I think there will be possibility, discussion to involve a greater element of the Indonesian government, possibly also Pak Joko here from the Indonesian Environmental Fund, to enhance the existing work that Ministry of Finance has embarked upon with the ETM country platform, how other elements in the Indonesian government can be orchestrated together to play the same song towards achieving the energy transition, just and affordable energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Mutia. I think there will be follow-up questions on that, but maybe first I would like to address additional concerns raised in terms of the, or questions in terms of the IAF to Pak Joko. So in the previous sessions, we understand that we heard about the PT-SMI's role in supporting the energy transitions funding in Indonesia. In this context, Pak Joko, of the energy transitions management process, which specific aspect that would involve the IAF anticipated contributions, and also what would be the differing roles of PT-SMI and IAF in this ETM program?
Yeah, of course, if we look from the mandate, because PT-SMI is already give the mandate as a Indonesia ETM country platform, and if we reverse from PT-SMI basic business, of course, they are really focused on the financial aspect, particularly from the commercial-based operation. And Indonesia Environment Fund, as a college from the PT-SMI, we only support from just transition aspect, like Ibu Rani mentioned. If we look from the structure, we have 3 different components under the just transition. One is CESA. So this is like the potential issue that Indonesia Environment Fund will could be support and also could be engaged, because we already have many experiences, involvement, and deal with NGO. And this is quite important, particularly not only for the ADB itself, but also from the government. When we implement energy transition mechanism, of course, we are not only focusing on the financial aspect, but also looking the consideration from the social as well as from the environmental aspect. Like Ibu Rani mentioned, how to transform, how to do like the green job transition. This is also quite interesting and also quite important, rather than we are only focusing on the financial aspect. And this is our strong point. PT-SMI as the ETM country platform, of course, will focus and engage with the financial aspect, deal with the financial institution, as well as the fiscal policy agency from the national perspective, from the macro perspective. And Indonesia Environment Fund will be support only from the small part on the just transition, including social aspect as well as the environmental aspect.
Thank you. Yes, in this regard, IAF has a very crucial role in terms of the accelerating the energy transitions mechanisms, and through the funding and hand in hand with the relevant funding platform that is available in the country. So thank you, Pak Joko. Let me check whether we still okay. Mr. Eugene, can we have more follow-up questions on your presentations on the ASEAN taxonomy too? So in the how is the ASEAN Taxonomy Board working towards the enhancing the interoperability of the ASEAN taxonomy, particularly because we do now have the presentations just from the Miss Henrietta about the EU taxonomy. If you could have share your views on this.
Right. Thank you very much for the question, Ibu. So one of the principles for the development of the ASEAN taxonomy is to take into account other international taxonomies and contextualizing that for ASEAN itself. And the idea really is that we want to prevent fragmentation. We want to ensure that in ASEAN, our regional and national circumstances are taken into consideration, but at the same time, we don't want to operate in a silo. We want this to be able to link and be interoperable with other international taxonomies, because capital needs to flow efficiently and effectively, and that is the purpose of the taxonomy. So I will highlight first that one very interesting thing about the ASEAN taxonomy is that it is a taxonomy meant to facilitate transition. And that was a fairly new concept at the time the ASEAN taxonomy came out. But now we see a lot of taxonomies actually looking at transition itself. So the Australian approach is also to look at transition, and the Canadian approach is also to incorporate transition. And more importantly, the ASEAN taxonomy in facilitating a transition also tries to safeguard the just and affordable aspects. And that is why we had the social aspects as part of the essential criteria. It also allows for remediation now. So these are really interesting aspects of the ASEAN taxonomy, which were maybe a bit ahead of its time, but now are getting very recognized. So let me just talk about the EU taxonomy, because I think if you talk about comprehensive taxonomies, the EU taxonomy always comes to mind, right? So the ASEAN taxonomy, for example, is designed to be interoperable with the EU taxonomy. The EU taxonomy has 6 environmental objectives. We have 4, but they're actually very similar. We can just fold them into each other. We use ISIC, so because it's very important that the classification system activities are compatible. EU uses NACE, we can reconcile that. We have a do no significant harm criteria, which I talked about just now. We have minimum safeguards, but to the extent of more human rights. The EU covers business ethics as well, but that's something which we can easily reconcile. We actually have the remedial measures to transition, which the EU doesn't have, but we hope that with things like the EU Commission's recommendation on facilitating finance for transition to a sustainable economy, this again can be aligned. We have a foundation framework, which is essentially an activity classification framework, but the EU taxonomy goes straight to technical screening criteria, which we also use. Of course, our technical screening criteria has up to three thresholds per economic activity. The EU has 1, but we are always trying to work to ensure that there's interoperability and equivalence, because then our highest tier is going to be compatible with the EU threshold. So it's not just about interoperability, but it's also about equivalence in the thresholds that we are using. At the same time, the Taxonomy Board constantly dialogues with other taxonomy efforts that are relevant to it. So it tries to ensure that all these efforts actually can be converted and translated to a common language.
Thank you. Thank you for the very insightful explanations on the ASEAN taxonomy, Mr. Eugene. With that, I think it is real relevant if I continue the questions to Ms. Henrietta. Those issue of interoperability also, I think, becomes crucial between the stakeholders of the EU taxonomy as well, especially for the businesses. Can you share with us what are the future development plans of the EU taxonomy concerning the interoperability issue between those 2 taxonomies, if any?
Yes, thank you very much for this. So indeed, as I already mentioned, interoperability is really crucial for us and for the cooperation among or across the world on all these issues. Up to now, I think we have mainly been using the International Platform on Sustainable Finance, which has a dedicated working group on taxonomy and which has aimed at really improving the interoperability between many different taxonomies across the world. One good example that we have been working on so far is the EU-China Common Ground Taxonomy, CGT it's called, EU-China Common Ground Taxonomy. So this has been a very successful cooperation between the EU and China, and we are now working on extending this to other taxonomies. We have been discussing directly with Singapore to start to look at the taxonomy of Singapore in the context of the ASEAN region. So this will, I think, be a next and very concrete step that we will discuss this with Singapore, and of course Singapore is then very well placed to discuss this and feed this further into the ASEAN structure. But as I mentioned, also we ourselves will be very happy to discuss this in a more wide ASEAN community.
Thank you, Ms. Henrietta. Maybe a little bit follow-up questions on this EU taxonomy. The EU taxonomy is renowned for its quite stringent criteria concerning the activities involving the coal-fired power generations. What is the, can you share with us the stance of the EU taxonomy regarding the efforts towards energy transitions through the early retirement of coal-fired power plants?
Okay, thank you very much. So as I already mentioned, the goal of the EU taxonomy is really to prevent greenwashing and to help our investors make sure that what they invest in is really in line with the environment and climate objectives that I mentioned. And for this to happen, the shift towards renewable energy is really essential. Otherwise, we will never make it to climate neutrality. But of course, our taxonomy framework does not prevent any any investment into conventional energy sources, including coal. So as I said before, it's not a mandatory list which determines this or that operation can receive public funding or not. So actually it's completely free how to invest. But of course the taxonomy really gives very clear criteria for activities which kind of outlines or puts into practice the principle of not making of making a substantial contribution and not doing significant harm. So, and in this context, in our understanding of that, power generation using solid fossil fuels, including coal, are not really qualifying as environmentally sustainable economic activities. Of course, we do understand that there's a need for a transition, and there are definitely a need for flexibility to make sure that we can supplement the existing systems with more flexible solutions, for example, storage, smart demand, and so on. And of course, there is a certain role for energy activities, some energy activities that can facilitate this transition. For example, the EU Commission came forward in last year, I think, or the year before, I can't remember right now, with a clarification, for example, classifying certain gas activities of compatible with the taxonomy regulation and as a transitional activities. So of course these would be subject to strict conditions to make sure that they don't crowd out other investments that are needed into renewables. So yeah, so this is, I think, what I can say about this. No, one more point that I wanted to mention. In the case of investing, for example, in gas, it's also clarified that it should act as a replacement of plants running on more solid and liquid, more polluting solid and liquid fuels. And in any case, the facility should switch fully to renewable by the 31st of December 2035. So it is really seen as a transition measure up to 2035. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was a very excellent explanation from the speakers. In the interest of time, because I'm a little bit worried about the available times right now, before we end the sessions, for all speakers in a sentence or two perhaps, yeah, is there any key message that you would like to share with all the participants and also the audience worldwide regarding the green economy and its transitions? So a very key message in a sentence or two or more. So I invite first from Ms. Mutia.
Yeah, I think from my discussion earlier, kind of focusing more on the government role, but I'd like to emphasize maybe in closing that just transition is everyone's business. It requires involvement for all stakeholders, including public sector as well as private sector, and I think the discussion on taxonomy really elevate the possibility on how even the private sector, the financial institution can be involved. So let's all strive together to achieve our common goal for just and affordable transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mutia. Then I invite Mr. Joko.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. I think that the transition is the most crucial thing, yeah, because particularly from the developing country, because we cannot transform suddenly from brown activity to become green. That's why transition is a very urgent and also very crucial for developing country. But the most important things from transition itself is consider social and environmental aspect, not only focusing from the financing aspect.
Thank you very much. Mr. Eugene, do you have any key message in this regard, please?
Yes. I agree totally with Pak Joko. We've spent a lot of time talking about perfect, but it's now time for action, and action translates to moving the transition agenda. So this is extremely important. And to move the transition agenda, we actually have to accept different starting points, and we need to come together using all the available tools we have: taxonomy, transition pathways, and disclosures, and leveraging demand and supply for funding to be able to advance this in a just and affordable manner.
Thank you. That was a very excellent one. And Ms. Henrietta, please.
Okay, famous last words. So I think I have said it all already. We are in a very serious situation. Climate change is real. We need to accelerate our joint efforts. It's something that we share. It's a problem of the entire world. And we have all committed to trying to maintain the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. So we need to put our money where our mouths are and move in that direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all the speakers for sharing the key messages and your very excellent thought on this. So ladies and gentlemen, I think we have come to the end of the seminar, Road to the Just and Affordable Transitions. And I hope you do have enjoyed this session and gained some valuable insight and knowledge from our distinguished speakers and prominent speakers. And I would like to thank our speakers once again for their time and expertise that has been shared with us. And let's join me in giving them a big round of applause. And finally, we also would like to thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully you also learned something new and useful from this seminar. So thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone. And I give the floor back to the MC.
Thank you for our honorable speakers who have been sharing the valuable, insightful discussions, and also thank you for our moderator, Ms. Oka, for moderating the sessions in these few hours. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now it's our pleasure to invite Mr. Parjono, Assistant Minister for Macroeconomic and International Finance, Ministry of Finance of Republic of Indonesia, to conclude this seminar with closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Parjono.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I will not add your ingredient, very sleepy afternoon after a very long day morning for discussion. But I know this is Indonesia. We have 2 seasons. Outside the buildings, summer. Inside the buildings, winter. And you feel now. It brings me a great honor and pleasure to participate in this event today. On behalf of the Minister of Finance, I would like to express our profound gratitude to all esteemed speakers for sharing invaluable insight and update regarding the strides being made towards a just and affordable transition within the region of ASEAN. I also extend our thanks to today's participants for their attentive engagement and the fruitful discussion that have been taken place. I will not sum up the discussion, as I know that you come from different parts, some of them from the regulatory, some of them from the business, private, and also I see many of you also from the World Bank and other MDBs. So please, you take your part, and also from us as the regulatory side will be on your guided, and with what they have to provide the playing field, the corridor, and the way that we have to go. And I sincerely hope that this seminar not only represents productive discussions, but also mark a moment of progress toward a just and affordable transition in the region. Our exchange of knowledge today resembles a stronger collaboration and provide a ring of inspiring policies to support the transition to move forward, broadening perspective on the frameworks, challenges, and opportunities ahead would be very valuable in exploring what more can be done toward a more sustainable future. With this, I close this seminar and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Parjono, for the closing remarks. Well, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now we have had a productive and inspiring time together. We now come to the end of the seminar on energy transition mechanism, ASEAN country updates. And last, before we are leaving this seminar, please fill out the feedback form as shown on the screen. Once again, please, before we're leaving this seminar, please fill out the feedback form that's shown on the screen. Thank you. And also, on behalf of the host, the committee, we'd like to extend our deepest appreciation to all of your support, participations, and also enthusiasm for this seminar. And I am Rima Budiarti. Good afternoon. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi 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 Om.